All right, my friends, we're back in action and once again, and now it is time to do chapter, oops, 7. Chapter 7, big highlights for chapter 7. We did a lot in class today. Let's talk about it a little bit more in terms of what it is. Think of it this way in terms of how to remember a few of the things coming out of it. This is the first time we're going to be dealing with, oh my gosh, my penmanship's terrible. The first time we're going to be dealing with nation building. That is awful. I have to get my handwriting back up to speed by practicing a little bit more. It's the first time we're nation building. For the last 12 years or so, we've been talking about tearing a nation down, redoing a nation, creating a nation. Now we're going to start building it. Right out the gate, here's kind of what you can expect to kind of like remember. One of the key concepts of the early part of our history is that financial conditions are really poor at the beginning. Of course, the main reason is we just got out of a war. Our lenders are not trusting us to pay us back. We're a new country. We're very small. A few things in our favor. Our population is doubling every 20 years. So every 20 years, you have twice as many people as you had before. And that's kind of a new concept that we see happening here in these new colonies. And then the other thing that I kind of mentioned, or I haven't mentioned much of, is what is our jobs? And you have to remember that in the early days, 90% of this 3 million population is farmers. And only 10%, if that, are going to be what you would call mercantile city dwellers, urbanites that are going to be living in Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Charleston, Baltimore, that kind of a situation. A lot of people think of us as, of course, backwards because we are frontiers folk. The frontier kind of defines us. But if you also think about this, more than 90% of us are east of the Appalachian Mountains. Appalachia. Oh gosh, that's terrible. Okay. 90% of us are east of Appalachia. So that's kind of a misnomer for us because we always think of us as frontier folk, but there's not that many people going into the Ohio Valley, taking over and, hacking out a life in the wilderness. GW, George Washington, is crucial here. He is the guy that sets forward all of the precedents. This is key that I spell this correctly for you. So you see it. Precedents. Yeah, he's the first true president, not the first one in terms of like history, because we also had the Articles presidents, but he's going to set down all of the rules regarding who runs the job and also who follows whose orders and such stuff like that. He's kind of a mythical figure now, but in terms of historical terms, he was probably the most trusted individual coming out of the French Indian and the colonial wars. He's probably the most trusted individual. He's probably one of the wealthier individuals. And as a result of that, people look to him to set a standard that he would put into play. A lot of people don't know this or remember this, but New York City is the first capital of the United States. He's sworn in on Wall Street, believe it or not. In New York City, there is no capital. It's the first capital. And while he's president, Capitol with an O. While he's president, they're going to be building Washington, D.C. And this is where the French architect is going to be called in, and they're going to create the city to make it have wide avenues and boulevards that are angled in sometimes parallel form. It kind of looks like Paris. And that's kind of where it goes from this. A few notable members of his first cabinet. The key one, or the key ones, where's my pen? There we go. The key ones to remember, of course, is Jefferson is your first Secretary of State. He's going to be putting himself into position as the diplomat for the country. He's very much aligned with France, even though they're going through a revolution. He's a Francophile. He loves that. His main nemesis, by the way, who's going to challenge his way of thinking and also, what goes on in terms of what happens, is whoa, too far. Sorry. His main nemesis is going to be Alexander Hamilton. Together, they're going to create the two-party system philosophically, and Hamilton is, of course, Secretary of Treasury, and he comes up with his Hamilton plan, which I'll review with you in just a second. And Secretary of War Henry Knox. You go down the list. Vice President, of course, John Adams. And they're going to follow a chain of command that eventually might have brought Hamilton to the White House, but he will not make it for reasons that we'll talk about in the next chapter. More specifically, Aaron Burr, that guy Aaron Burr. What's up with him? No, get rid of this. Click. One of the things that was added to the early form of government was the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights have 10 amendments attached to it. It was a promise that was fulfilled by the founders. They didn't have to, but I guess they did. They got 2/3 of the Congress to adopt it, and 3/4 of the states to ratify. They were ratified in 1791. If that's something you want to remember for future reference in terms of timing. 1787 was Constitutional Convention. 1791. So within that little space of time, we've got our first government of the United States. So here's a review of some of these that you might want to consider useful for you in the next couple of months, because we talk about them a lot. We talk about, that's too far. We talk about the Bill of Rights as it applies to government and action, and also what happens when we have questions regarding them. But the First Amendment has 5 parts to it. It's known as the Freedom Amendment, right? So the first one is religion in terms of its exercise. That was the crucial one that goes way back to Jefferson's Virginia. I can't remember the name now. The Virginia, you know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. The Virginia Amendment, I think it was called. I have to look that back up. That's embarrassing. It's just going blank on me right there. But free exercise was crucial in the early day. And then there was a second religion component, which tried to create no establishment of one faith. However, religion is intimately tied with everything. So don't think that it's just a complete separation. It's going to be blended in different ways. That's kind of the key misunderstanding that a lot of people have. The next one is speech. The question is, how much do you have? How free is that speech? The next one is assembly, getting together, protesting, telling people that you don't like what's going on. And the last one is the right to a free press. And that, of course, was crucial under understanding of the revolutionary time period and what was going on with that. So free press / petition. I guess free speech, free press is kind of the same thing, but it's the petition element that we're talking about here. The right that you can tell your government what's going on. In fact, I would move free press up into speech. They're almost the same thing. But a lot of people kind of call them different things, even though they're not. All right, that's the first. Second had to do with having a militia. And the way it reads, of course, is the right to bear arms. But it's not just individuals. It was designed to be constructing a citizens' militia. But it's a weapons statute, and who has access and why. That's kind of where the second comes from. Third is one of the most obscure ones. It's the Quartering Act all over again, but we will not quarter soldiers in our houses. That was kind of a Revolutionary War throwback. The Fourth Amendment is crucial for later police work because it has to do with searches and seizures. How do you get evidence? How do you get it? It's not seizures. Seizure. Search and seizure. So how do you get a hold of people's evidence? How do you come about that? The Fifth Amendment was important in that it provided something that's called due process, which guarantees an individual that you will go in front of a process, a procedure, some kind of court setting. You just won't just be thrown in jail without charge. And that was the idea behind it. It also protected an individual from the double prosecution of a crime if one is found innocent at the first trial, and that's called double jeopardy. Jeopardy. Sorry about that. My misspelling right there. Jeopardy. All right, sweet. And that kind of falls right in there. That's an O, not an A. There you go. So that's fifth. Going over to the sixth. The Sixth Amendment was the guarantee to a proper trial or trial procedures. The Seventh Amendment is going to be guaranteeing that you have a jury that's going to judge you. An Eighth Amendment was looking at your punishment, so they throw this cruel and unusual thing in here, which of course is our determination as humans, what is cruel, what is unusual in terms of punishment. It also prevented you from excessive or high bails that would be placed on you and forbid you to be free while you're awaiting trial. Now, the 9th and the 10th were the all-encompassing stopgaps. The 9th basically says if it's not in the Constitution, it doesn't mean that people don't retain rights that are not enumerated or written down. So people have rights. People are protected because, let's face it, we don't know if there's going to be an internet in the future, but if there is, we should adopt a rule about your own individual rights. And then the last one, the 10th, protected states' rights. States' rights from government involvement from a federal level. And it also reserves rights to the states. Like, if it's not in the Constitution, it doesn't mean we can't do it. So, for instance, like a speed limit, a drinking law, a drinking age, all of those are part of that concept and what that works in terms of what it is. And that's the most important thing. I don't want to see you. No, thank you. One of the things that Washington will sign into law is Congress passes the Judiciary Act of 1789. And this is going to establish your Supreme Court. It's also going to establish your court system at the federal level. The first Justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice, is John Jay, who's one of your founding fathers. John Jay is going to be your Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And as a way of kind of like comparing how the court's going to develop over time, there wasn't a whole lot to decide in the early phases because we were just establishing all the rules, and that was kind of how it looked, and that's also how it went and worked. All right, sweet. So what's the deal with Hamilton? Hamilton's an interesting guy. He's actually a British citizen, born in the British West Indies, probably to a wealthy sugar plantation family. Moved to the colonies when he was a young man. Was a very young man when he rose up through the ranks of government. Was looked upon as being elite, arrogant, haughty, kind of one of those individuals who doesn't make a lot of friends, but has a very headstrong way of looking at life and how he's going to do it. And the four-part plan that he's going to devise, which is going to become known as Hamilton's plan, is an early way of looking at how the government's going to try to kind of get itself into the game of being a power. So the first concept we talked about today was, pay all the debts. But don't pay them partially, pay them in full. Pay debts in full so people trust us. That's the key, beginning of our economic system that's going to keep us going. Let's put a tariff or a tax on imports because those imports are cutting into American industry and our American ingenuity. And then third, we need a little bit of a revenue supply, so let's put a tax on whiskey and see what happens when that goes down. Then the last thing was we needed a uniform system of keeping it all together, so of course the National Bank works out nicely for that. This Hamilton plan, of course, made a lot of people happy because it provided stability that we weren't having before in the Articles of Confederation. But unfortunately for others, it looked as one more example of the government getting too powerful too quick, and that's where that's where it sets up its concept. This is also where you start to see the Jefferson versus Hamilton divide, and it's really a question of whose government do you want. Do you want a large, powerful, spell it. You want a large, powerful, flexible government on a national level that's able to handle problems and able to manipulate systems? Or do you want a more local, citizen-based system where the power is diffused but is there when needed? So if we need it, we use it. But if we don't need it, of course, leave it at the local level. And that was the idea. Now, where is Washington in this debate? Washington, my friends, is right here, and he's taking from both. He's not going to do too much for either one, but when needed, Washington will be the one that's going to hold it all together for his first 2 terms. When Adams comes in, he starts to lean towards one side, towards the Hamilton side, and of course Jefferson's going to counteract by running against him, and that's the way it goes. You're going to start to have a 2-party system in play as that looks. Leave it alone. The Windows Basic, it's fine. Okay, now we're down here. Okay, sweet. So you'll hear this a lot when you talk about like how to interpret the Constitution, because the Constitution does not have all of the rules in it. It's not like a rule book that has all of the ideas in it. So here's where we introduce the concept of loose versus strict, or in another way of thinking about it, how do you see the law in terms of the way it's interpreted, or how do you see the law the way it's written? Loose interpretation means you're allowed to create what's the best word for it? You're allowed to create connections that aren't really there in the words, but these connections can be interpreted, and they can be, I guess that's the best way to kind of describe it, interpreted and also adapted to changes that aren't foreseen when they wrote it. Strict is just literal. If it's in there, it exists. If it's not there, it does not exist. Therefore, it is very, I guess the best way to put it, it's very rigid in terms of its interpretation. If it doesn't say anything about the internet, then don't do anything about the internet. Just don't even talk about it. So one of the things that's going to be happening over time is, where is the balancing act going to be taking place between the people who are going to be making the laws and the people going to be interpreting the laws. So in the end, Hamilton got a lot of his things in play. He got his bank in play for 20 years. He got the tax put in on whiskey. Of course, the key thing with the Whiskey Rebellion, remember, my big theme about the Whiskey Rebellion is that the Whiskey Rebellion shows that the federal government has teeth, that the federal government means business. And it's also a way of looking at the federal government as being dependable and also reliable to manage crises. It's a crises-based government in many cases, the federal government. Congress makes the rules. It's the way the president interprets them. That's going to be the key that sets it all up at the same time. Outside issues happening that are shaping things up. There's the beginning of a divide. So these factions are going to create political parties. We didn't see that coming. That was something we did not foresee when we created the Constitution. The second thing that you notice is that the French Revolution is going on. French Revolution is huge in terms of the way we see our problems here, because we interpret that French Revolution as a way of kind of measuring our own people and our own situation here. And then the last thing is this new form of trade that's beginning is kind of creating an industrial revolution in England and the rest of Europe. And being that we are the raw materials base, we are starting to play a huge role in that. And the question is, do we industrialize, or do we just supply the raw material end of things? And how is that going to work? Washington's whole deal is to stay neutral, and that was his hope. Stay neutral, stay out of everybody's business, and don't allow Don't allow the Europeans to dominate us. But the second thing he warned us about was, political parties are really a problem, because in many ways they create disagreement, which slows down the government. But in another way of thinking, that's a good thing, because now you have arguments that are going to be able to get to a compromise, hopefully, or deals that are not going to be so much in favor of one side or the other. And that's kind of a nice addition with that. Leave me alone. On the other hand, the British are pushing our buttons, because the British are still trying to combat against the French. And when Napoleon comes into power, right around the time of the next chapter's reading, it's really going to be a war between the French and the rest of Europe, and we're going to be caught in the middle of it. The British still don't treat us, with a lot of respect, but the impressment of our sailors is one of the key arguments we have about, like, hey, you're not treating us with a lot of fairness. You're just pushing us around. But there's nothing really we can do about it. Washington leaves after 2 terms. He warns us about alliances. He warns us about political parties. John Adams takes over. Unfortunately for John Adams, he's just dealing with a world that's having too much going on at the same time. He's going to have difficulty, of course, with the XYZ affair. He's going to have difficulty managing this two-party split that's coming. The two parties are starting to divide him up in terms of his power base and also what he can do in Congress. And along the other ways of looking at it, it just looks like things are just kind of flowing towards a conclusion that's not going to be very positive. The Alien and Sedition Acts was more or less a political weapon to get rid of people speaking out against the government. It's going to challenge our question about like due process and law, because everybody was an alien who's over the age of 12. Let's put it that way. You know, if you were 20 years old, you were born in England, because we were a colony at that time. So the question, of course, is whose alliances are we going to be treating, and that was one of the first challenges to our freedom as we looked at that one. But as the French and the British start their quasi-war, start their war with our quasi-war, and as they seize our warships and they get us all angry about the situation, it just pushes us towards a conflict which is yet to resolve. It's yet to resolve yet. So we end up pretty much now at a spot where things are kind of moving. The Sedition Act, the Alien Act are put into play, and we start to see this idea of states' rights. And it's a states' rights versus federalism concept. And you're starting to hear words like nullification, like I'm not going to follow your rules because I don't agree with them. You're going to start to also hear ideas like interposition, like I'm going to put myself ahead of the national government because our state is more significant. Interposition. There you go. And those arguments are going to carry all the way down to the Civil War. You're going to hear them a lot, especially when we talk about the growth of slavery and the growth of the Southern economy and the Northern economy being split up so much the way they like it. But here's the deal. When you come down to the end of the day, the Federalists look a lot like what you would consider to be modern-day Democrats, except back in this time period, here's the key differences between Federalists and Republicans. Federalists are led by Hamilton, the Hamiltonians. The Hamiltons. I don't think I need to put the S on Hamilton. Let me erase that. Okay, thank you. Go back to the pen. Hamilton, yes. So they were led by Hamilton. They are mostly coming out of the wealthy classes from the North, and we're looking at industry becoming, and commerce, industry and commerce being the key links between the classes that are kind of joining up with this party in terms of what they want, what they're doing. A lot of bankers, a lot of manufacturers, a lot of people on the East Coast, east/north part of the country, and they trusted the educated elite. They looked at the educated elite as being the group that's going to run everything, that's going to do it for the betterment of everybody else anyway, because everybody else is needing some kind of support, and that's kind of how it works. These new groups that are forming along the lines of Thomas Jefferson's philosophy at first were called Democratic Republicans, which can be confusing. But if you just call them Republicans, it makes sense because they're kind of like today's Republicans in some ways, in terms of what they wanted. Now, their head honcho was Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson's idea was for the country to be run by educated farmers. That the farmer is the person who is most in touch with what's going on, because he's in touch with the land, he's in touch with nature, and he knows how things work in a way that being educated by a university wouldn't teach you. So he said, do both. Be a farmer, but also be educated at a university if you can afford it. And he's the one who created the University of Virginia. So that's the idea about that. He also said it's not about systems, it's about common sense in some cases, that we don't need to have systems running the show for us. We simply need to kind of like rely on our own ideas more than anything else. And his leadership was centered in what we would call the rural South and West. As we start gravitating west, there would be more of that mindset there as what that was. And they were also very pro-French, just probably because Jefferson was pro-French so much. So that was one of the ideas about that one in terms of how that kind of looked. When the election comes down, like I mentioned today, It came down to the pass where the Democrat-Republicans win. One of the main reasons is that Adams just couldn't solve certain problems during his presidency, and the popular sentiment was kind of against him. He was also kind of a grump. I don't know if that was actually, going to be part of his downfall. There's a great miniseries out of HBO called Adams. You can check it out on Amazon if you want to look at that. But it's kind of an interesting way. But the revolution of 1800 was a revolution for many reasons. But the most important reason it was a revolution was it was your first true two-party split or two-party election. And remember, the controversy of the Burr-Jefferson tie was kind of important because of that. Okay, good. Let me put a little E on that one, not a C. There you go. Oh, I keep making it look funky. All right, and that's kind of where we left off. And when you read next time, you're going to take off right away in the early days of the Jefferson presidency, and we're going to talk about how it will affect the courts, how it will affect our international relations, and more importantly, what's going to happen to our internal development, our internal growth. These are the three big themes coming out of the next chapter. If you pay attention to those early, you'll see those show up a lot. And that's it. So thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you had a good week and you had some good reading and everything was going great. But this is a quick review of Chapter 7 out of the Nordhoff High School AP U.S. History textbook. Have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.